if your kid has increased levels of screen time at ages 1 and 2, they're already performing worse on developmental screeners by 2 and 3. Okay. So we're actually seeing true developmental screeners that have been standard for quite some time, where we haven't ever seen this deviation with anything else. Screen time is coming in and saying, okay, you're now going to be performing worse. On top of that, kids aged 5 or younger who experience 2 or more hours of daily screen time are 8 times more likely to be diagnosed with focus-related conditions, including ADHD.
And this is a podcast on Young Adults Today where we talk about the faith of the next generation. We interview thought leaders, pastors, and authors, theologians, apologists, and generational researchers about the faith of the next generation. We're fanatical about reaching young adults in our world today. We're going to talk about parenting, pastoring, things like screen time and smartphones, and the do's and don'ts of technology as Christian families. And our guest, new to the show, is David Tucker. Welcome, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, we are thrilled that you said yes to us and our audience today. And if you're new tuning in for the listener today, that you know that we create new content every single Monday, that we talk to theologians and authors and thought leaders and people who are on the forefront of changing the world in which we live in some positive ways, while pointing everybody to Christ and the biblical context and the Bible teachings and everything else along the way. So we have an incredible opportunity to get to know David. So David, we want to learn as much as we can. We're going to be selfishly sponging this up as well, just like our audience today, because we're parents of a 2 and a 4-year-old. They're the alpha generation. And I know that you have a lot of experience and a lot of questions have come your way when it comes to the digital parenting and just the fundamentals of it and how it can make or break some of our family trees, from our communication to what our eyes see to what we let in behind closed doors or maybe even in open doors. So can you just share a little about your journey of life and story and what got you passionate about this particular topic?
Seriously.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm excited to share, because this is truly one of those stories where God's worked in so many different ways to get me to where I'm at. And so I just want to take you back. If you can imagine, about 8 years ago, I had my youth minister at the time, who actually happened to be a friend of mine for a long time, who came and said, listen, we want you to come talk to our parents about technology. So I go through, I do all my prep work again. And I'll talk more about this in a minute, but I'm from the tech industry. And so I thought, great, I'm glad to go do this. I'm going to go present them with some information, and I'm going to tell them about dangers that happen in other places of the world, right? Not in our little church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And what happened was, I went into that room, I shared with the group, and I learned that all of these horrible things were happening in our church to families. It was such a moment where God just really made it clear to me something He'd put on my heart early on. But this moment was when I realized, like, this isn't happening in other places. This isn't happening to other families. This is happening to people I see every time I walk into church, and some families have been affected by it greatly. And that's really what started things kind of turning for me. And just to give you a little background on how I even got to that point. So I've kind of had 2 different areas of my career. So when I started off, when I left college, I went and helped plant a church in the Washington, D.C. area. Had a great time there. I did music and youth, and it was a wonderful experience. I stayed there for about 3 years and got married, actually, while I was there. Met my wife there. She was coming to the church, and so we got married, and so that was a great phase of life. But after that, I shifted over to working just kind of in the secular world with technology. And so I've been a software developer ever since college, and I just really pushed into that for a while still volunteering. So even today, I'm on the preaching team at our church here in Chattanooga, and I help teach students on Sunday mornings. So I do the 7th grade, actually now the 8th grade small group on Sunday morning. So I'm still connected with that younger generation. And also I've got my kids of my own. So I've got twin 15-year-olds and a 14-year-old daughter right behind them. There was a time we had 3 kids under 2. I wouldn't advise that, but man, God brought us through that. It's been amazing to see them now grow up just into their own people and get to see how they're just growing in their relationship with God. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we got from point A to point B in my life.
Love it, David. I mean, man, I look at for churches and pastors and next gen leaders, parents who are listening, this is a huge conversation. This is an important talk to be having. I look at the way that the local church is poised to lean into topics like this with a biblical framework and understanding things like history and theology, to understanding also some of the nuances of parenting and technology. And this is, I mean, hitting just about on all cylinders, because this is, I mean, something that we all need to consider our own relationship with our phone and
Mm-hmm.
our devices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
that's one of the number one things that I talk to families about is, yes, you need to work with your kids, but there is nothing better you can do than modeling the behavior that you're supposed to have, right? And our kids so often pick up our bad habits in those areas.
well, I remember our oldest daughter might have been about 18 months, I'm guessing, at the time that this happened. But she got like a bun, like a hamburger bun that was from the play food at the kitchen set. And she started walking around like this. And I know where she got that. And it's
Gibbering
from
and
me.
jabbering, talking on her toy.
And it was one of those moments early on as a dad that goes, okay, we have 2 weekly podcasts. We have a ministry, a nonprofit. We're trying to reach people with the gospel and equip and train leaders. And part of that is even online.
Yeah.
But I don't want to become a digitally distracted dad. And so we're going to unpack more on that in a second. But I think the next question up is, David, from your perspective, why is young adult ministry and discipling the next generation, why is that so vital?
It's hard for me to even put into words how passionate I am about young adult ministry. It's a situation where if you look at our culture, and a lot of times I spend time analyzing our culture because I'm not just trying to understand, hey, what should parents do, but I'm also trying to understand, how did we get here? What led us to this point where we're having the struggles? I believe every generation has struggles, and I think God helps kind of the next generation come and help fix some of those things, but then they also develop some of their own struggles. And as I look at things right now, just the culmination of challenges that are coming to bear when we look at everywhere really through, and it starts young, but if we want to really focus on kind of that area between college and, when you turn 30, there's so many life challenges that are unique that we're really dealing with for the first time in this generation. And the problem is that for so many people, they're finding answers to those challenges outside of the church. They're finding answers outside of the context of scripture. And so for people to be able to come in and contextualize what's happening in our world to scripture and help them understand, this is how you apply this to your life, using your phone just as one example, like this is how you do that according to God's word. There's ways that you can be wise. There's ways that you can be unwise with this. And so I think it's just because there's so many new challenges, because there's so many things in our world that are driving us to live in different ways. We need those people who are pushing into young adult ministry to say, this is how you do this according to God's word.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you even talked about the 18 to 30-year-old, all those decisions being made, because Josiah and I recently found out that 85% of the decisions that you make between those 12 to 13 years are pivotal. That's 85% of your life choices happen between that time. And when we kind of just look at young adults and they're coming to us saying, what about us? Like, where's our place? Where's our room? If I'm single and I'm 27, I desire a marriage and I have my degree and I'm strong in my career, like where's my place? And when it comes to the pastor who might be tuning in today, when it comes to just the young adults of Gen Z and Alpha, like what do we need to know as pastors when it comes to the Alpha generation who's 14 and younger and Gen Z who's currently in college? Because Alpha generation is 4 years away from being on the college campuses. What do pastors need to know at large when it comes to those two generations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's start off with Gen Z and let's talk through this a bit. One of the things that has been greatly talked about, but unfortunately not as much in the church as it should be, is the concept of mental health. And one of the things that we see is 2010 was this really turning point in almost every piece of data we can find around mental health and this generation. And so if we look at it, the one thing that really kind of helps explain why 2010 was such a pivotal point is the fact that this was when smartphone ownership really rose to being just kind of a niche thing that some people would do, to now this is the norm in society and this is expected. And what we've seen is, every trend of mental health has declined since that point, right? Now, depending on your age around 2010, right, it depends on how extreme this was. But for those that were just in like beginning middle school in that age, they're still going to be in that Gen Z group. That is the group that it affected the most. And it's actually continuing as we go past that into Generation Alpha, which we'll talk about in a minute. But with that, I think churches need to understand that the concepts of mental health, and if we even really want to push in that even more and talk about concepts like loneliness,
Yes.
we're in a very digitally connected age, but yet people are lonelier than they've ever been. And so I think we really need to start to think about ministry in a way of helping deal with some of these very pragmatic day-to-day issues. If you're not thinking about how do I take my young adult ministry and help combat loneliness amongst that group, you're missing out on what is one of the greatest needs that they have, right? And that's actually going to continue to be even a bigger deal when we start to talk about Gen Alpha, although you're going to deal with it in a different way just because of their age. But you have to understand this group went through COVID, right, at a very pivotal point in their development. And so I know for those of us that were involved even in student ministry at that point in time, like seeing these kids come back in and not really know how to interact with one another. So loneliness and social interaction, learning to create opportunities for students to connect and communicate apart from digital platforms. And this is one of the things that's central. I'm not one of those that's going to say, hey, everything digital is bad. That's a whole other conversation. I think there's a lot of good things, but I think if you're just automatically assuming and you're not thinking as a pastor about how you communicate, the type of interactions that you have, if you're continuing to push, especially Gen Alpha, more and more into those digital platforms, you might need to take a step back and say, is this the healthiest thing that we can do as a ministry?
Oh, that's so good. And it reminds me of our friend, so Molly DeFrank. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she wrote a book called Digital Detox. And it's literally a 21-day fast from social media, from all platforms. Obviously, there's work and all that kind of things. But what she found out was staggering when it came to this. For every 1 hour of screen time that a child is consuming, their ability to socially interact goes down 10%. That's like verbally communicating, that's eye contact, that's just like the body language and the interaction. So if the average, person is watching 3 to 4 hours in whatever age demographic, 40% of your social ability to be in a room, to have human contact, to build community, to combat loneliness, whether you're a 5-year-old in your first day of pre-K or kindergarten, or you're the 15-year-old first day of high school, like just even that stat alone was really like, oh my gosh, like what do we need to digitally detox in our household? And that was an amazing book and resource for listener, aside from what David's writing today. But when I heard that, I was like, whoa, like pastors need to know this. Parents need to know this. We need to be advocating for our households, right?
Well, and let me push into that even further, okay? So we've had data that started to come out in 2023 that's telling us that if your kid has increased levels of screen time at ages 1 and 2, they're already performing worse on developmental screeners by 2 and 3. Okay, so we're actually seeing true developmental screeners that have been standard for quite some time, where we haven't ever seen this deviation with anything else. Screen time is coming in and saying, okay, you're now going to be performing worse. On top of that, kids aged 5 or younger who experience 2 or more hours of daily screen time are 8 times more likely to be diagnosed with focus related conditions, including ADHD. So let's play this out, okay? If those are the issues that are happening, right? How do we know God, right? We know God, and he has designed it so that we can get closer to him through moments of solitude, through prayer, through studying his word. And if we are already handicapping our ability for our kids to focus with the decisions we're making when they're at age 1 and 2, this is becoming something where we're making it harder for them to do those things even later into life. And this is why I think pastors really need to say, parents, you need to know this information, maybe even before you have kids, because we don't want to put any stumbling blocks in the way of our kids being able to get close to God. Now, ultimately, I firmly believe this is just a plan of the enemy, and this is something that when we get parents together and we apply God's word, we can undo a lot of this. But parents that just look kind of, oh, I'm going to give myself, maybe 30 minutes of free time by just handing my kids this tablet, there are consequences.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, seriously, I know that we talked, or you shared, David, about loneliness a second ago, and through this podcast, YouTube has a creator studio that sometimes I'll just see what's changed or if they have any feedback. And one of the things that they shared for us based on kind of our niche with audience and reach and listeners, viewers, what they said will trend upward is if we do a conversation around building community as a 20 something.
Mhm.
And I go, like, what's crazy is we came across a tweet that said that in it was July of 2023, that month, the Google search, how do I make friends, reached an all-time high. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, man, on the college campus, we've seen
Mhm.
this think about it. If you are 25, you're working your first job, or you're a high school student,
Mhm.
and you have this mirage of, I have 4,700 followers, whatever that means.
Right.
What does it actually translate into people showing up with presence in our lives, the ability to listen actively, the
Mhm.
ability to share your feelings, things like the highs and lows. And one of the things that you write about in this book that we will link in the show notes, it's called the Digital Parenting Guidebook. We also have its accompanying resource of just kind of a fundamental workbook and guidebook for parents. But one of the things that you share about is the idea of having a parenting blueprint and action plan. Can you unpack that idea and concept for the listener who's maybe they've got kids or maybe they're thinking about family planning? Unpack, if you will, David, the idea of what is a parenting blueprint and action plan when it comes to digital parenting.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've noticed with parents is they know, hey, I need to do something about screen time, for example. Like it's rare that I run across a parent that just says screen time doesn't matter. But what happens, right? We know parents are busy, right? And to be honest, depending on the age, kids are busy. And so it's just easier to say, let's just keep doing what we're doing and maybe in the future we'll adjust something, right? And again, screen time is just one of the things, right, that has to do with technology. What we tell parents is the very first week, because we're coming out with a course this fall, that's what you had just mentioned with Digital Parenting Fundamentals. It's going to be designed for churches to bring this into their ministry so that they can actually run through this book with parents. One of the things we tell them the very first week is, okay, sit down and figure out what are the things you want for your family, right?
Mhm.
What are the things you truly want? Like, I'm just going to pull one of the ones that my wife and I came up with for ours, which is we want our kids to have healthy marriages if they choose to marry, right?
Yes.
It's just something that we've always wanted. It's part of our heart for them. And so as we look at it now, every decision we make when it comes to technology, but also other areas, we can say, does this support that or does it go against that?
So
It
good.
gives us kind of in essence, a little bit of that compass to make sure that as parents, we're pushing towards the things that we want for our family. And what we've noticed in the classes that we've done, so many parents have never taken the time to sit down and do that. They're just making decisions off of what's the easiest thing to do right now. And we're trying to push parents to be more intentional in saying, what's going to ultimately meet the goals that I want for my family that are, again, based on God's word, based on what he's leading me to do as a parent. And then the other side of that is, okay, now that you know, related to technology, what's your plan? What's your action plan that you're going to take, right? What are the screen time limits? There's a part of it we call the family screen time plan that you do in the very step one. We go through 7 different essential steps of digital parenting. So step one is all about just getting those limits in place, determining what those boundaries are, right? And then we just systematically move through each of those 7 steps. And there's different, for each of the steps, there's different pieces of the action plan that you'll implement in your own home.
I absolutely love that. If I read the first 50 pages in 30 minutes, and I'm not the fastest reader. So what really caught my eye when it came down to the blueprint was imagine yourself building your dream home. Like you've waited all this time to get exactly from the knobs to the flooring to the foliage in your yard to the house, the size, everything. And all of a sudden you roll up 8 months later and you recognize that this is not the blueprints that you gave the contractor. And the contractor apologizes and says, well, we never went back and looked at any of the edits. We looked at the initial outline of the blueprint. And I think even as a listener, to be mindful of as your children grow, their ages and stages change, to be mindful it's okay to revisit that blueprint and reevaluate the wants due to the dynamics of the family. Whether you have one child, now you have five, whether they're 15, 14, 13, or they're newborns. Like, to have those boundaries set up, I think is essential, and to stick with it and to be on the same page as your spouse, I think is just powerful, because then we go back to what are the true wants. And one of our wants in our house is not only for our children, if they do desire to get married, is to have good, godly Christian men in their lives and leading the household. But in addition to that, we want them to want to be home for the holidays. We want them to be around the table, and like, not that we can't live without them, but those are some of our prayers. Like, we want them to want to be at home for the special occasions as they get older. And for the people listening, whether parents or pastors or anything, what boundaries need to be in place for parents and technology? Because I think sometimes as a parent, I read in the book, like, a 17-year-old daughter is really struggling. The mom comes to you and says, how do I undo what I've done the last 10 years of zero boundaries when it comes to technology? And she wants to reverse time and pick up the pieces. What do we need to know, and what do we actually have control in as parents when we need to look in the mirror ourselves and maybe evaluate, oh, what they've been exposed to because of my habits is actually why they think and function the way they do, or mimic with, like, our daughter, what they see in the household. So
Well, let me go back to your example that you just mentioned about wanting your kids to be around for the special events for the holidays, right? Now it shines a whole different light on, let's say there's something critical happening in the church or with something else, and you end up during Thanksgiving spending half the time on your phone or on your computer over in the corner. You're actually going against the goal that you've created. You're not creating that moment with them that they're going to want to have in the future. And that's where we kind of connect the blueprint to those day-to-day events. But one of the things that I talk about with parents on how to really live that out, how to make those decisions, there's two parts to the family screen time plan that parents will do in step one if they're going through the book. The first part is just for you as parents. Your kids never have to see it. And this is where you get to sit down and have some good conversations with your spouse. Like, what things do we need to start doing in terms of technology, stop doing or change, and just have that conversation with you two. And then you get to come up with a list of, and let's be honest, sometimes that can be a little rough when you have somebody else giving you an opinion on how you're choosing to live out this area of your life. But then after that, you get to go through and make some guidelines that you're going to stick with. So what time of the week is going to be device free, right? What spaces in the house are going to be device free? Like, is there going to be a time at night when we all put devices down and say, this is family time? So these are all things that we're just really enabling couples to have conversations. They can choose to do with it what they want. We have a lot of areas where we have recommendations, both in the book and in the course that's coming up, but ultimately it's up to the families to have those conversations and implement it. And that's why we put the step first for the parents, even before the kids.
That's powerful. I think this is just our hope, really.
Mhm.
And I know, David, we just sense this from you as well. This isn't a message of you need to be afraid, or we're striking fear in the listener, or shame on you.
Mhm.
This is a message of equipping. I remember being called in a ministry and going to Bible college. And I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm about to graduate and I don't feel ready or equipped to be a pastor. So I signed up for some of the pastoral theology classes, and it was amazing. By reading Spiritual Leadership by J. Oswald Sanders, it was like, whoa, Ordering Your Private World by Gordon MacDonald, and just a few books, or diving deep into First and Second Timothy and living there for a second. This was the instructions that Paul, the Apostle Paul, gave to his mentee and son in the faith, Timothy. And I think that whether it's LGBTQ, whether it is politics or racism, I remember we surveyed our listeners and we found that there were 7 tough topics that young leaders feel just ill-equipped to talk about. And I think this is one of them right now for parents. And so hopefully this is an equipping conversation, but I think to get really practical, should kids have smartphones and use social media? And if so, at what age?
It's funny you ask that because truthfully, the question I get asked, and it's literally 100 times any other question that I get asked, is when should I give my kid a phone? And I always tell parents, I think that's the wrong question, right? There are three questions that I want to replace that with. Okay. The first is, have I trained my child to know how to handle the temptations that would come with having a phone? Okay. The second is, has my child demonstrated, and this is really the super practical one, has my child demonstrated that they're ready to handle the responsibility that comes with having a phone, right? And the third is, do I have the time as a parent to properly configure and train my child to use it properly, right? If parents can answer those questions and say, yeah, I think we're good on all those, then okay. Now I am a big advocate for, I do think most families would be better to wait until later. And so if you can wait until after eighth grade, really get into high school, I think there's a lot of value in that. My kids, again, 14, 15, and 15, they don't have phones yet, but they will within the next about 6 to 8 months, because we've got some that are going to start driving on their own. And so they're going to have phones. And so we're going through this process with them now to prepare them for that. But one of the biggest things that I see often is just parents get pressured by their kids to get a phone, which is understandable. Kids sense that pressure that, hey, everyone around me has a phone. It tends to kind of spread like, like a virus, right? One member of the friend group gets a phone, and then every kid has to go have a conversation with their parents. But the problem is that parents want to they want to deal with that. And really they want to give it to the kids for their kids, but they just drop it to them without instructions, without training, without a framework for them to handle what they're going to come to. And every situation is different. I've talked to a lot of situations with co-parenting where it might make sense for kids to have at least some communication device a little earlier so that one parent can stay in contact. There's a lot of things. So I don't think there is a one size fits all answer. I always push parents back to those three questions that I mentioned.
Those are phenomenal questions to just like hit pause, hit rewind, and re-listen to those, and add that to your, blueprint, add it to the action plan. I think that some of the research that I've just seen is that there was an interview I watched with I think it was a psychologist, and he was saying delay until age 16. No
Yes.
social media accounts until age 16, and smartphones just really similarly. And I think it goes back to the mental health piece. I think it goes back to the advertising piece. I think that just we had a conversation on this podcast with Dr. Sammy Kim, he's a pastor in New York, teaches at Harvard. And around the topic of mental health, when he shared that the average Gen Zer today has the same and is exposed to the same amount of anxiety as the psychiatric patient from the mid 1950s. I mean, that should speak something
Mhm.
to us just as far as globalization and technology. And our brains were not really designed to have all the information in the world. And what do you do
Yes.
with that? And how do we have these types of
Mhm.
equipping conversations with our kids, with those in maybe our ministry or in our church? And I love the conversation already. I know, Micah, you had something you wanted to share.
Oh man, well, I just go back to the fact that empowering your children and teaching them. Like we've had people on this conversation talking about the addiction of not only technology but pornography. Like, well, how do we tell our children? Because 70% of the teenagers have cell phones. I think that's what was said in the book. So when you look at that, it's like, well, my kid might not have a phone, but when they go over to so and so's house, they're exposed to everything. How do we have the open conversations to where our children can come to us as parents and have that open dialogue of this is what I saw, this is what happened at so and so's house. So it's like we're not going to give them a phone without equipping them and having the hard conversations. No texting and driving. Here are your check-in points. You have your location device on, or whatever you set up as a parent and parameters. And with that, I can't help but stare at page 40 of your book, because the average person between the ages of let's see here, 8 and 18 spends 26,700 hours on screen time. And we're talking screen time is just not your cell phone. It's cell phone, it's taking in content, it's television, it's all forms of technology and where your eyes are watching a screen, which obviously equates to a lot of time. So if you want to know what 26,700 hours equates to, it's 4 years and 208 days before your 18th birthday that you've been on screen time. So, with those numbers, I kind of wanted to faint or throw up a little bit when I heard that because we're robbing ourselves of living because we're trying to vicariously live through others or seek the approval of man instead of turn to God. So, what do parents need to know when it comes to the inappropriate content, online predators, the maintaining security and privacy? What do we need to know? Not even the basics, but the shortcuts, because sometimes, I mean, aware of the shortcuts. So my cell phone has a little thing that has a calculator app on it, but that's not actually that. It's something hidden on my kid's device. How do parents need to stay ahead of something they feel so behind in?
Yeah, it's a great question because I understand most every parent dealing with this area feels behind. So let's talk about kind of the ideal situation. We'll have a little time to talk about, well, what if you're kind of behind? Like, what if you truly are behind and your kids are far down this path? So the ideal situation is that you're having discussions with your kid before they encounter these issues. So one of the things we have as a part of step 2 is we have a discussion guide around pornography to have with your kid. Because, and this is why it's so important, and I'll say this too, this needs to happen way earlier than you as a parent will feel comfortable having the conversation. We're talking like 7 or 8 to when this conversation needs to happen. Because there's so much of a risk that your kid is going to see something that if you don't give them a framework for how to deal with that or what they should do if they do encounter it, they could end up in some very dangerous situations, especially if this is happening maybe through an online interaction that they didn't even initiate, right? If they don't know, oh, I saw something here that I know fits into this category, I need to immediately go tell mom or dad or who or leader of some sort that I'm with, then they could end up going down a very bad path. So that's why discussions are so essential. And all the discussion guides we have that are included as a part of the book, they're actually available as an online resource. They're all scenario based. So it's you get to sit down with your kid and say, well, let's just imagine that this happened. Like, what would you do? And then there are notes in there for parents to coach them through, hey, be sure you talk about this. Or in some cases, we'll reference other books that we think are great resources. There is a book series called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, which is really great for talking to kids about pornography. The author there has done a phenomenal job. So we didn't try to recreate that. She's got a resource for older kids and one for younger kids as well. So they're just tying in other resources that can be helpful. But this is a huge thing. And being able to have this conversation with them, that's one side. The other side is we need to actually talk to them about what the Bible says before they're really encountering this temptation. So we also have Bible studies that accompany 4 of the 7 steps that parents, again, can sit down, even if you've never led a Bible study with your children before. We've had a lot of parents that have fit that criteria. It's something where you can sit down, spend 30 minutes just looking over it, and then lead your family through it. And so we can actually see what it says about what we let into our hearts through what we watch, through what we listen to. And then we can teach our kids how they can start to make the right decision. Because as you said, today we can't block everything from our kids. At some point, they will be around a kid that has unrestricted access to the internet. So we have to teach them how to make the right decision. So that's the ideal scenario in terms of getting in front of it, being able to have discussions early, being able to sit down and talk through the Bible early. But that's not every family. I totally get that. Some families are a little bit further down the path and their kids might be into something that they had no idea about. And that is where, as a parent, it is helpful to go follow the resources where they'll tell you, hey, look out for these apps and watch out for this. Or if you see this from your kid, this is something that's troubling. That stuff's helpful. And at some point, also, parents need to understand if their kid has gone really far down this path, this is where there can be some great Christian counselors that can step in and help to deal with some of these things. Because there can be, I know we talk a lot about addiction. I want parents to realize that there are points where this reaches true addiction, where professional help can be extremely helpful, whether that's an addiction to just screen time in general or an addiction to pornography specifically. There are areas where outside help might be needed to really help your kid get through what they're struggling with.
David, anytime we have this conversation online, offline, with our friends, in our small group, at church, I mean, wherever, one of the things that inevitably comes up is just the mental health aspect. Another side that surfaces is like big tech. And those who are like kind of in your old space of software development, technology, maybe whether it's data or social media, things like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Google, other Amazon, a lot of these Apple, a lot of these companies and executives have been interviewed just as far as like they won't give their kids devices. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think when you're able to look at the data, and again, one of the perspectives, if you're working at a company like that and you can really see holistically how people are interacting with the devices that you're using, when you know how much data is being collected through every digital interaction, and that's something we help you educate your kids on in step 6. Once you understand that, you kind of want to shield your kid from that. You don't want all of their information out there. And there's a lot of reasons why. We could talk about things like it's a big thing now for kids that between the ages of like 13 and 16, somebody will steal their identity and go and get loans, because then usually that won't be discovered until the kid goes to apply for college. And if they need college loans, they'll be like, why? Your credit's already wrecked. And so there's so many things like that. Just wanting to keep your kids' information a little bit more contained and not just way out there in the world. I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is truthfully, we know that tech companies know about the negative side effects of what they're doing. So one of the things I talk about in the book was the biggest source of information that we have about Instagram being harmful, especially for young teen girls, came from an internal study that got leaked from Facebook, right? So, which again, it's, Meta being the parent company over Instagram and Facebook, they had done this internal study. The Wall Street Journal got their hands on it and published this, and just basically published it as is. And so they know what they're doing. And here's the sad part about all of this. At the time, even with all of that knowledge, Meta was moving forward 100% with developing Instagram for kids, and only after a huge public outcry was that actually stopped, right? So they know in those companies that there's parts of their platforms. Again, there's parts of their platforms that are very useful. And again, we could have another conversation about, I've seen a lot of ways where I have contacts on the mission field that I talk with on a weekly basis, and we're on, Facebook Messenger, or we're on Zoom. We're able to share, messages from each other's churches, and there's so many great uses of technology and of platforms like Facebook, like LinkedIn, like Zoom. They're great uses of them, but it's also something that's extremely dangerous, especially for kids who don't yet have the mental capacity to understand the ramifications of their actions.
I think that's so good. It just makes me think of some of the things that I've seen, like all these actors and actresses that were discovered like in the early 90s, and they're well famous now, and they might have the platforms and the social media things. But when they're interviewed, they're like, we didn't have to worry about getting torn apart on social media in this way that the world in which they are. Like, comparison was a thing, but it was internally. It was with like your co-stars. It was in the demographic of Hollywood. It wasn't for the world to see and be exposed to every wrinkle on your face and every mistake you've ever made. It's literally the ability for a 10, 15-year-old to go on the internet to do and create, even if it's amazing content. There are haters, and there are people that are just straight up just want to destroy you with their words. And I would say that my psyche can't even handle the things that would probably be or have been said about me or about anything. So just really being mindful that I don't, like Josiah said, like our brains and bodies were not designed and created for this in the context of technology and social media. And that's why it's important to have real life relationships, real life conversations with our friends, with our families, and to develop deep, meaningful friendships and relationships, not just on the digital platforms, which can be beneficial because we've met a lot of amazing people through those things. But when you have the Christ community around you, when you're plugged into a church, when Christ is the center of your life, no matter what season you're in, and there's community that's naturally being built around you, that is naturally building, I don't know, safeguards in your life without even knowing it, just by having those three I view as fundamentals. Not everybody does or has that, but that's kind of back to the basics of why do we exist? And it's for Christ, it's for church body to use our time, talents, and treasures. And it's for community to do life together and link arms together and push the gospel forward. And the web can be used for that, but it comes with some warning as well.
It really does. I mean, any other thoughts on parenting? Before we move forward, like just David, any other broad thoughts, whether it's mental health or conversations that are helpful to have with kids? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just going to share something because this is so pressing for right now. So every now and then we see kind of the dangers change and there's new things that emerge. And so one of the trends, I'm just selfishly, using this as a platform to just tell parents like, hey, even if you don't read the book, even if you don't do anything else, I want you to do this, is talk to your kids about the concept of sextortion. This has become such a big enough deal right now that the FBI has had to spin up a whole unit. We've had, and I'm going to miss the numbers here slightly because I don't usually have notes on this, but this is kind of off the cuff here. I believe we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 kids over the last 2 years that have committed suicide because of this concept. And so your kids go online. This is especially true for boys. They'll have someone interacting, pretending to be somebody of the opposite sex. They'll convince them to eventually send an inappropriate picture of themselves, and then they blackmail them. And there's a story that I actually open up the book with about this, where it went from this starting to happen to a kid to him taking his life in 23 minutes. And
Wow.
so every parent today, right? If you have a kid, you need to explain to them that this can happen. And this is one of the reasons why, one of the many, many reasons why you wouldn't ever send an image like that ever, because in the hands of somebody who wants to do you harm, they can absolutely do you harm. And unfortunately for some of them, they felt like there was no way out when they got into that situation. So just want to encourage parents, because this is a trend that is growing. The BBC just did a feature on it a couple weeks ago. This is a really big deal. So just take time to talk to your kids about that.
Man,
Hmm.
glad you went there, David. I think that it's the stakes are too high to do nothing. The stakes
Hmm.
are too high to be silent or to feel overwhelmed or under-equipped. The stakes of parenting are sky high. The stakes of raising, when I was a kid, I remember my dad's kind of just hilarious, but I remember whenever he would like check out at a store and he comes to pay, maybe they'd comment at the store clerk or whatever, oh, great kids or whatever. And he goes, it's tough raising good parents these days. And I always thought he was joking. And now I realize like maybe he was joking, but I look at the case for parenting and the listener, you're trying. And the message of hope is God's doing more than you think he is,
Yeah.
and he's using you. What I'm challenged to do is when I fall short is to let our girls see it and to apologize,
Yes.
because I'm I'm one beggar trying to tell some other people where the food is. Like this is really, we're all imperfect, and I want you like, because where we find ourselves, Mike and I, in 2024 is we're parents of young kids, where we're having this conversation probably a little bit to peek behind the corner and see what's coming. But I think also our ministry is such that we have 2 weekly podcasts. So there's a component of thought leadership. There's listeners who are authors, podcasters, pastors, and they want, or maybe their kids are and want to publish content. I think of so many in Gen Z want to be entrepreneurs, so many in Gen Alpha want to be YouTubers. But what guardrails will help people like us to utilize social media for the good and protect us from wasting our lives scrolling aimlessly?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question because it's also, it's funny. It's the same thing I struggle with, because even though I'm telling parents, hey, be on social media less, really be intentional with your time that you're spending on devices, right? I'm trying to build an organization here that's going to help parents for the next decade navigate these challenges. So I'm on social media, right? I'm on devices responding to people that are like, hey, I want to know more about this. I want to know more about that. And so I'm having the same challenge, myself. But what I would say is it's all a matter, I know this is going to seem like an oversimplification, but it's all a matter of priority, right? If we're learning to prioritize our relationship with God in terms of spending that quality time to grow closer to God, and this next one I think is the one that we miss out the most on in kind of, at least in my generation, is the second is building Christian community, in-person community.
Yep.
Build, in other words, don't worry about that follower count. Let's try to build relationships of people that would show up at our funeral, right? That should be the goal of what we're trying to do. And so by doing that, we also were counteracted. We're going to have less time to sit there and doom scroll through Facebook. If we're truly spending that time going out and encouraging one another, we're truly doing life together. then that's going to take care of some of that. But the other piece of that is just, if you have someone in your life, obviously, especially your spouse, if you're married, somebody that can speak into it and can speak into your habits and your behaviors, and they can start to see when you're going a little bit off the rails, give them the freedom to speak into that and say, listen, this has gotten to be a bit much. Like, we need to, hey, don't bring that phone to the dinner table. Like, let's talk about ways as a family that we're going to intentionally do that. And if you're not married, this is a great opportunity for you to use that Christian community you have to give them the ability to speak into your life, right? Give them the freedom to say, hey, if you notice me doing these things, I need you to call me out on it so that I can make better use of the time. Because this is one of the verses that we talk about a lot in the book is, again, make the best use of the time because the days are evil. And we need people to speak into that, because the challenge these days is we don't always realize it immediately when we're going down that path.
That's so good. I mean, I'd love to hear your feedback for me. Like, right off the bat, I know if a day's going to be great or just if I grab this first in the morning or this.
Yes. Yes.
And if you're listening and not watching on YouTube, like I held up a Bible and I held up my phone, because it's like, I noticed that sometimes I use my phone as an alarm clock, or maybe the day starts really early and I grab it and I'm helping with the kids or whatever. And then I log in to see what emails are, or what's the day look like? What's the calendar, versus like getting alone quietly with God, listening to the still small voice, doing things like my Bible in the year reading plan. So prayer, journaling, that side, man, it's going to be a great day. If I grab for the phone, and then the other thing that I've noticed is on Sundays, usually on the way to church, I get this notification on my phone that's my weekly screen time report. If my daily average is like 4 hours or less, I feel pretty good with my mental health.
Yeah.
If it starts to creep, like I think of one week, it was 4 hours, 38 minutes, or closer to 5 hours. I notice above 4 hours, man, I'm not feeling great. If it's under 4 hours, I'm feeling okay. And I mean, I guess what we're talking with our board of our nonprofit about is in January, taking 2 weeks where we might not run the podcast.
Right.
And I'm not going to be on my phone. And we are going to take a break from work, and especially social media, mainly more for me than for Micah. But I'm just sharing, because I guess the other things that I try to do is on date night, not be on my phone, because Micah is the spouse who, when we were dating, I remember she said, is that phone more important than me? And we were at dinner. So, I mean, and then, I mean, I think like, man, if it's a day off and I can leave my phone in that drawer over there,
Yes.
wow, I'm like a present dad, and the girls appreciate it. Micah appreciates it. Thoughts, feedback on that, David? Am I heading in the right direction? Do you have boundaries of your own? Like, I just resonated when you're like, I'm trying to build this organization to do deep work and good for people and to get the message out. And it involves social media, but I don't want to be a digitally distracted dad.
No, I resonated with so much of what you said about those specific principles. So there's a guy who wrote a book, Justin Whitmill Early, called Habits of the Household. And the first habit that he goes through is scripture before phone, right? And that's kind of one of his guiding principles. And that's one that that I agree with you. It changes a day. It completely changes the focus of a day to do that. And I think the other thing that really hit me, and this has been about a year ago, was this ultimately is a faith issue. If you feel that God has led you in your heart to have times when you're not connected, do you trust that it's okay for you to not pick up your phone and check those messages, check your email, that God's got things covered for you on that? Or is it, no, I have to have control? And at the end of the day, in most cases, I've noticed that when I pick up that phone, when I kind of thought, well, I don't need it, it's a control issue. It's me in my heart saying, I believe I want to control this, rather than having the faith that God's going to take care of it during, maybe this one day or these few hours or whatever I've set aside, where I said, I don't need it.
Man, that speaks to me. I
I
welcome.
could tell it was by your body language.
But I welcome that type of Christian community that says, like, hey, this is a faith issue. Where do I really trust? It's similar to tithing. This is
Yes.
an exercise of faith.
Mhm.
This is a step of obedience and faith. It's a lot like getting water baptized or, man, the Sabbath.
Yes.
To this point, this is similar with Sabbath to me, where it's like when I Sabbath, which PS as a parent is hard because it's the Sabbath is exhausting.
It's a different kind of Sabbath.
Yes.
Am I right?
No, you're totally right. I mean, I feel like we're just at the ages of our kids where like we can say like, hey kids, we're gonna have this relaxing time. Like you guys have relaxing time too, but you can go do it on your own and you don't need us every minute of the day. So yeah, there is a period coming where that will be more real again. But yeah, there's certainly a decade or so there where that's really hard.
Well, I think we're in that hard where Sabbathing is actually sometimes harder than work because sometimes there's help with childcare and stuff. But I just go, man, like what you said to me and the listener about like this is an exercise of trust and faith and a
Mhm.
step of faith. So, man, thanks for going there. I'm loving this conversation. Micah, did you have anything to add or should we do 5 and 5?
Oh, I just want to say one thing that we've agreed upon in our house. I don't know if this will help, David, or this will help the listener, that we've decided because God's called us to do and how he's called us to do it, we are on social media. And we've decided as a family that we're going to be more creative. We're going to create content versus consume content.
Mm.
So we're going to do more creating than we are consuming. Now, does that mean that we're not reading books and doing our research and studying the Bible? Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But we're not going to sit there and scroll for 3-4 hours in the comparison trap because we're going to create to inspire and to encourage and hopefully further God's kingdom in that process. So if you find yourself in a season of limbo where you're really trying to move things forward, take a step back and maybe set those limitations like, oh, TikTok's 10 minutes a day, XYZ 10 minutes a day, like whatever that is, to help you have a better mental capacity. Because I will say what you prioritize like gets done. Like let's learn to prioritize our priorities and be obedient and steward what God has given us. And keeping in mind that as pastors, we can be guilty sometimes, or thought leaders, of building our own kingdom and not God's in the process. So when
Absolutely.
we start externally focusing and surrendering all those things, like I'm not striving to have 10,000 followers. God, if you want 10,000 to follow me, then that's great. If not, I could care less. Like I have to, and I don't have that problem. I think a lot of people do where I'm like, I don't, I'm not worried about that. Like, as long as my family knows who I am and I'm famous within my household, that's all that matters. Like, that's all that matters. And so I just want to encourage a listener like you do and will be the biggest advocate for yourself, for your family, for your children, and how you set them up is up to you. And if you feel like you're falling behind, you're never too far gone to hopefully reel them back in and reel yourself back in. But Josiah has said this perfectly. I don't know where it originated from about the telephone. Like, tell them the
Oh,
I don't want to mess it up. Go ahead.
yeah, if you know the name Dr. Tim Elmore, he said it on the show and he just said that when our phones had leashes, we were free, but now that our phones are free, we have leashes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
man.
if you feel like you're attached to a leash today, like there's freedom in that. There's freedom in that. And you can find a place in um, a program or some rules or fundamentals that help structure your family to move things forward well. So I just want to encourage you there if you feel like you're behind or if you want to get ahead. But we want to get ahead right here because we have 5 and 5. David, are you up for the challenge? 5 minutes on the clock.
Absolutely.
Rapid fire questions. Question number 1.
It's one small step for man,
Neil Armstrong sets foot on the moon.
one giant leap for mankind.
Sometimes one small step can lead to a giant leap. If you have a call to change the world for Christ, GFA World invites you to their Ministry Apprenticeship Program. Take one small step. Log on to gfa.org/apprenticeship. Go to gfa.org/apprenticeship.
All right, let us into your brain a little bit on this one. What are you learning in 2024 that excites you?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited right now because there's a movement of adults that are beginning to shift away from smartphones. And there's companies that are coming out with some new options, Light Phone being one of them, but there's others of really trying to figure out what it would look like to still get some of the benefits of technology, but yet not have the smartphone. Because one of the things we know is just that becomes something, like we said, that we're tethered to, and we're more likely to pull out our phones than we are to maybe pull out an iPad or something, right? So I'm just excited on seeing where that space goes. I'm in contact with those companies and trying to just see what develops out of that.
Awesome.
Phenomenal. What's a hobby that we would find you doing maybe on a day off for fun?
So it's funny. I love playing music. Now, I used to be a worship leader long ago. Now I spend most of my time more speaking than doing music. But so the cool thing about that is music kind of now gets to be fun. It's not necessarily work for me. I'm not the greatest in the world. That was part of what I learned was, once I was around real musicians, like, man, maybe I'm not quite as good as I thought I was. But the cool part about it is that having a hobby, it's like you almost have the freedom to not have to be super amazing at it. You can just enjoy it.
Awesome. Okay, question number 3. Here's the curveball. If you could ask Josiah and myself any question under the sun, what would you want to know today?
I would want to know from you guys, because I want to ask this of every parent. Like, what do you find hardest for you guys about parenting and technology?
I would say the challenge I'm experiencing now is to not overexpose or underexpose our children. You know what I mean? Because I think watching a movie is a privilege. It's something fun. It's not a right in our home. So what's a right with technology and what's a privilege? Because they're only 2 and 4. So it's like, what do we have control over right now that's going to set them up for success? Because our kids love to color, they love to draw, and they see us on the computer. So they want to type like we're typing, and they want to color their little pictures with like the pens and the things instead of actually always tangibly doing it, even though they enjoy that as well. So I would say maybe just going back to the fundamentals of what do we want our family to look like, and going back to truly writing out our blueprint is, I think, a fun challenge. And I like assignments because I'm a geek. So I think that would be something I want to, even coming out of this conversation, have with Josiah, and set up those guardrails, maybe a little tighter, even though our children aren't exposed to a lot of technology, maybe.
David, for me, I think that it's easy. Like if Micah said to me right now, I want to be a tech-free household, like I could get rid of that TV today, wouldn't bug me. I'd maybe want to watch a Vikings game or the Twins or stuff like that. But the part that's hardest for me isn't even like, hey, kids, watch this. Like I need a break. It's me disconnecting from work. It's me, like the integrated life. Like I felt this as a dad. When I'm working, I feel guilty being away from the kids. When I'm with the kids, I don't know why. Maybe it's the level of autonomy that leading an organization comes with, both the responsibility and the freedoms. Like I find it hard to disconnect. My pastor, when I had lunch with him, he goes, "Well, Josiah, nobody needs to tell you to work harder." So the people who know me, they're like on the side of put your phone away, like she is. But for me, there is this, I want to reach people, I want to make an impact. And sometimes I think I feel more qualified as a pastor, as a podcaster, as a blogger or writer than I do as a dad.
Hmm.
Understood.
That's good.
It was like freeing to say. I just like sighed relief. And then you understood me. Thanks,
Totally.
man.
Hey, I feel you on that, and there've been a lot of times I felt that. I think there's certain phases of the kids' lives I've felt that more than others. So trust me, I totally get it.
Oh,
Wow. Thanks
that's
for letting
good.
me be that.
He went there. That's good. That's
Um,
good.
Hey, is there a place that you guys would want to travel on a family vacay?
I've really been intrigued by Rome, and part of the reason I say that is because we actually had that booked in 2020.
No.
Yeah, so that was going to be actually I take that back. It was 2021, but same issue. Obviously, why we didn't do it. It was going to be for my 40th birthday. We were going to go over there, and of course, instead of that, we got to eat takeout on the deck because it was in the middle of COVID. So there you go.
Oh, the next best thing. Maybe you'll still get to Rome. I pray you do. All right, last question. If you could leave the listener with one piece of encouragement, what would you want to leave them with today?
I would say be encouraged by the fact that God called you to be here in 2024. And that's true whether you're parents or whether you're single, because parents also often, I hear them say, this is so much harder because of technology. And I just want to remind them, listen, God has called you to be here today. So you can trust that he's going to provide what you need. Even though this challenge is hard, he is greater and he can equip you. And if you're here and you're single and you don't have those challenges of parenting, but you're trying to manage this in your own life, yet again, God is able to get you through this. God knew you were going to be here during this time. It's not like social media was a surprise to him or any of those other challenges. And so he's going to be able to provide what you need. If he puts something on your heart, he will equip you to be able to act on that.
Amen.
Wow. Hey, David, man, I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for your work. We will link the book and the course and digitalparenting.com in the show notes. So it's easy and accessible for the listener, for the viewer. But man, maybe it's the season of life that I'm in, but I just found this conversation, like I've been dying to have this conversation and excited for more in the future with you.
Absolutely. This has been great. Thank you both.
You're listening to the Young Adults Today podcast. Man, we enjoyed that conversation so much, and we want to give you a free gift. It's an ebook, 10 Steps to Starting a Successful Young Adult Ministry. It's linked in the show notes for free as a listener of this podcast, and all you need to do is visit www.youngadults.today. For you, for your pastors, for your leadership teams, for your volunteers, 10 steps to starting a successful young adult ministry when you visit youngadults.today. Thanks for tuning in to the show. We'll see you back here next week.